Hello everyone. Thank you very much for being here. We know you have a lot of choices in Vegas, so thank you. Really appreciate the fact that you're here today for this session. Today we are talking about University of Arizona's journey to AWS Cloud. So back in 2013, UFA started analysis and migrating their websites and student portal to AWS. And then a few years later today, they're talking about moving enterprise applications and PeopleSoft applications to AWS Cloud. So I'd like to invite Derek and Lauren on stage. Derek is the CTO, and Lauren is the Director of Enterprise Technical Services. And they're going to talk about their journey to AWS, the challenges they faced, lessons learned, and how they achieved a successful migration to AWS. Derek, thank you.
Thank you, Srini. Again, as Srini noted, sincerely appreciate everyone's presence tonight. We know, you may not know, in fact, half the room may empty when I tell you that you're missing the vendor reception, right? All that swag downstairs. Thank you for giving up that to spend some time with us tonight talking about our journey to the cloud at the University of Arizona. So, for those of you that are not our staff, might be half of us actually, I'm going to tell you a little bit about the University of Arizona. 42,000 students, give or take, a handful, delivering or consuming, I guess, 300 plus majors in undergraduate and postgraduate work. That's a pretty big job, right, in higher ed, pretty big institution. Roughly $2 billion in annual revenue, roughly half of that through instruction, the other half roughly through the conduct of our research. As Srini noted, a couple of years ago, we committed to being cloud first and to migrating the vast majority, if not all, of our applications onto the cloud. That amounts to over 75 of the most critical central enterprise services that we are committed to moving to the cloud, some of which are already there, some of which are mid-journey. So wanted to just talk real quickly about the motivation, all right? So why did we go to the cloud? And the big thing, the one that I really love to talk about is the notion that we took, and we'll talk in more detail about this later, we took a process in one of our enterprise systems that used to take 6 weeks traditionally and actually started with no, and transitioned that to a yes answer, and we can provision environments now in 6 minutes. So we went from 6 weeks to 6 minutes. At the end of the day, that's what we're after from the cloud, right? We save money, we transition capital to OpEx, we retool, we reposition our staff. All of those things are great things. At the end of the day, one of the key things we're after, and you'll see it, really is a responsive, flexible, agile IT unit that can meet the needs of a very demanding business, right? So our challenge, what was it that we were up against? This, I know for a fact, is unique to us, right? Demand for Thank you very much. That was my only joke, and I'm glad one person got it. So demand for IT services increasing all the time, exponentially, while funding and staffing does not increase, right? In fact, in many cases, through the last many years, funding, in particular, is on the decline, or at least stagnant. So we have to do more with less. And when we have to do more with less, sometimes we have to change the paradigm that we operate under. So why cloud, right? So we said we committed to cloud first. We committed to moving everything to the cloud. Well, why, right? I talked about it a little bit not all that long ago. Agile, flexible, responsive, that's what we're after. Talk about time to build an environment. So in our enterprise systems, on-premise, when a unit wants us to develop a particular piece of functionality or test a bug fix from a vendor or what have you, generally have to build an environment to do that. We have to have the hardware, we have to provision the operating systems, we there's a lot of work to do between the time when a user realizes they need an environment and our ability to provision. And even when we can, there's weeks involved in that provisioning process. And when I say when we can, it means like assuming we have enough storage and enough servers and enough hypervisor licensing and whatever else. Weeks to minutes. We went from weeks to months, and it was fantastic, right? Weeks to minutes, right? 6 weeks to 6 minutes to build an environment, and we don't ever have to ask ourselves whether or not we have the environmental capacity, because the cloud has the capacity. We can grow into it, we can shrink out of it whenever we want to, so we can be a more responsive IT unit. And we only pay for what we use, right? That's very, very appealing in those temporary environmental spaces, right? We don't have to buy the hardware ahead of time and have it available. It's just there when we need it. When it comes time to test for DR, being constrained by the hardware that you have, being constrained by the physical data centers, we have two. In some cases, we're pretty fortunate. I know folks that only have one. We can fail between our data centers, but that's finite, and they're very fixed places in the cloud, particularly in Amazon. We don't have to be constrained by those same things, right? We can fail from one AZ to another, from one region to another, one app at a time in many cases. On-prem, relying on the same infrastructure, often we have to fail things all at the same time. Anyway. Agility, responsiveness, uptime during testing, reduced risk, resiliency, those are all the things that we're after, right? They sound very appealing. They're certainly very, very appealing to me. And so a couple of years ago, we asked Amazon through their professional services branch to come in and take a look. There was a lot of concern about, like, will our workload run in the cloud? Will it actually, can we do this for real, right? So take a look at all of our workloads in our enterprise systems and help us ascertain which ones are ready and which ones are not, because we're ready, right? I went to a class, I got AWS certified, ready to go. Let's just do this, right? And Amazon came back and said, lo and behold, our workloads will be fine. But we're not ready. That was an interesting realization for us, because we felt ready, right? We had declared it to be. We're going to the cloud. It's just the next evolution in the technical landscape, right? IT people are accustomed to change. We live in an environment that's constantly changing. What's really that hard about this? Well, excuse me, lots and lots of things change when you commit to moving to the cloud, right? When the notion of transitioning from capital expense, a largely capital-driven kind of ecosystem, into an operational expense ecosystem where things are procured fundamentally differently, right? Things are provisioned fundamentally differently by the people who would typically provision them. We were committed, but we didn't have the processes in place to really act on this cloud-first strategy. Our workload was going to be fine. We were assured of that, but we had some growing to do. We had staffing. Our staff were ready, interested, generally speaking, but the skill set in the cloud is so substantially different than on-prem. They needed training. They needed time in the environments to get comfortable. So as committed as we might happen to be to an aggressive timeline, we had to kind of peel some of that back and say, we've got to get ready to do this whole hog by training folks, by addressing and assessing our processes from procurement to security to well, just about everything about how IT is managed and provisioned has to be reconsidered or assessed from a governance perspective as you kind of climb up the curve. So that was a really, really interesting kind of epiphany for us. And at that point, I turned it over, much as I'm going to do with this talk, to folks like Lauren Babson, our Director for Enterprise Technical Services, who has in the last couple of years fundamentally driven the charge to really actualize a lot of what's on our roadmap and kind of drive these commitments home. So with that, Lauren.
Thank you. And that's absolutely true. We said, we knew why we wanted to go to the cloud. We knew we had a strategy, but we didn't know what to do next. And so we put together the plan, our roadmap. And we actually started with our research administration. It was our first enterprise application. It was our proof of concept. And we really sat down and said, we were due for an upgrade, so why not do an upgrade and a giant move to a totally different infrastructure at the same time? But it worked. It was successful. We really embraced the scripting, automating the infrastructure, and we heavily used chef recipes, and it was a success. And at the same time that we were migrating our CCoE to AWS, we were working on websites, arizona.edu. We moved to Acquia, and we came up with some blueprints for some smaller things. And so we decided that we would have a blueprint for serving kind of simple static websites. And so we have S3. One great example is that we had our BI running a report that really was a syllabi for our courses, and that would simply kind of deploy to a S3 and serve as a web page. And so we were able to kind of use these blueprints for kind of easy standard type things like that. At the same time, unfortunately, also probably something no one else has to deal with, denial of service attacks. And what we found was that we had really no way to communicate when all of our on-prem infrastructure was down or was degraded. And so we created this IT outage communication and really stood up a SNS service and provided a way for a web page and for subscription kind of based notification, so that we were able to get the information out to people on campus when there were downtime situations where we wanted to notify people, and we just had no way to actually do that. So it also feeds to our Twitter feed and things like that, but it also provided a way for people to subscribe and get notifications however was best for them. So we have 3 pillars, our PeopleSoft. We have ELM, which is their enterprise learning management. We have HCM, human capital management, kind of the HR payroll benefits, and we have Campus Solutions, which is our student administration. And that is around 70 servers and about 20 terabytes. And it is on aging infrastructure. And so our infrastructure folks, a lot of them in the room today, kept warning us that our risks were increasing because our infrastructure was aging, and we needed to do something about it. But every time the costs came in, we wanted to rework them and figure out a way to do it less expensive. And really, we just kind of we weren't necessarily thinking cloud for sure, but we definitely had it in the back of our mind. So we actually partner with a company called Burgundy, who does our environment management for these PeopleSoft products, and one of the Burgundy folks came to us and said, "Look, we're not kind of getting anywhere. How about we just go see if we can make this work in the cloud? And basically what he was saying was, there's no harm in trying. Let's try to figure this out, because again, if we stay on-prem, if we're trying to figure out cheaper solutions on-prem, we're gonna run into something. Our risks are gonna be high. So he really sold it. We kind of looked at each other and said, yeah, let's do that. And we basically had a small group of really smart, dedicated people who are just meeting once a week on Tuesdays, figuring this thing out, architecting, rolling this out. And our first rollout is our PeopleSoft ELM, and that is in testing stages right now. And so we kind of used all of the features. So funny story was that when we first started, this same guy is the database administrator, and he was very much thinking in the beginning that we were going to set up EC2 instances and set up Oracle RAC on those EC2 instances. And as we kind of went through the process, he kind of slowly but surely converted to RDS. And when I asked him, I actually texted with him yesterday, and I said, what made you kind of change your mind? And it was really those being able to build up the database, tear it down, backups, restores, all of those quick, easy things that AWS makes easy. And he kind of had a side note that the thought of maintaining Oracle on EC2 right now kind of makes him cringe. So he really went from all the way, one way. As he learned, what RDS can do, he kind of converted over to a totally different way of thinking. So we've learned a lot on the way of this, and so now we're moving all of our enterprise services. Identity management is next. We have to authenticate in the cloud. We can't be using on-prem authentication when our services are in the cloud. And we also have a financial system, Quali Financials, that's due to move to AWS in spring. So we have just a couple projects underway. I have notes. So we had this beginnings of the plan. We had a roadmap, and what we decided to do is tie it all together with a big project. So we created a project we called Clouderprise, and it's moving our enterprise services to the cloud. And it's really a kind of a program. It's a giant project of mini projects or of even big projects. And what we did was we put this huge visual display of University of Arizona with all of these hot air balloons. Not my idea. It was a great idea. I think last year at reInvent, I attended a session where one of the universities was actually moving into their data centers, or they had cowbells that were representing every time a service moved, and just some way to show progress and to actually show and communicate what was happening. So we have this giant board in one of our halls, and the people on project teams actually go and kind of move their hot air balloon up, and it ascends, as it goes from kind of the planning stages to testing, to in process to testing, and then when it reaches the cloud. So it was I definitely recommend something to show progress. We don't send a lot of emails about the progress, but we do have something that's visual that people can see. So we have a plan. We have a bunch of applications and services moving, but what about the operations? What about all of the things that we need for all of those services? The processes and procedures and the technical pieces when you're on-prem are all pretty well established. people know how to stand up in environments, and they know kind of how to do all of the things that they've been doing. And then you say cloud, and it's like a tornado hit, and there's all of these things that you have to figure out from scratch. There's, maybe coming here is a rule book, but there's no rule book. So you could end up with something like this, where you have each application, and now you have these things. How is your application going to send email? What are you going to do about logging, monitoring, and alerting? What's your security model? All of the things here. And so what we could easily end up with is something like this. We have extremely smart people, problem solvers, and application teams. And so what we could easily end up with is a solution per team or per service. And we're an enterprise organization. We really need to be, that'd be an extremely high cost to have kind of a solution per application. So what we did was created a version of a Cloud Center of Excellence. So a Center of Excellence is a group, just as just a definition, a group that leads an organization in some particular area of focus. And so a Cloud Center of Excellence, we formed the group, and they self-named ourselves the Cloud Advisory Team. But one of the goals of that team is to have something like this, where you really have all of your strategies and your models across all of your services, as close as possible. I mean, there's still going to be exceptions, but as close as possible, you have solutions across the board. On that Cloud Center of Excellence, what we did was we pulled people from different areas of our central IT organization together, so that we had some people that had been working with cloud for a long time, and we had people that hadn't really been involved yet, but kind of needed to be like networking area or the web team, and really had a representative from different areas and kind of join this team. And this next slide makes me laugh, because I love working at the University of Arizona, but decision making is, so this slide was about 20 more boxes and arrows, and then when AWS technical folks got it, they cleaned it up, because they said, people wouldn't be able to follow. I was like, that's the point. People can't follow the decision-making process at the university, probably at lots of places. So really, this isn't meant to actually show a decision-making process, but that's kind of how it is. And the more complicated the decision, the more people end up, being asked and, input and things like that. So someone would come up with a question or can we do this, and we may or may not kind of ever hear the answer. So with our cloud advisory team, we actually did get it down to something that looks like this. We do have somebody that has a question or a recommendation or something. It goes to the cloud advisory team, and it can be somebody on the team that makes the recommendation or asks the question, or not. And then we can have technical people that come in and talk to it, and there can be questions and that kind of thing. But if there's an expense, if there's a financial part of it, and the cloud advisory team does recommend that we do it, it does go to one more group to make the final, can we make this spend? And then there's a decision. If there's no spend, the cloud advisory team makes the decision. We really streamlined that whole decision-making process. And because we are having input from different areas, we're getting different perspectives. We're not, kind of doing things in a vacuum. And it really increases that communication and knowledge, because, they go back and talk to their, staff and peers and whatnot. And so it's really helped us significantly. So this is kind of the governance piece. So we had the strategy, we have the project, kind of the what are we actually going to do, and then to tie in the governance and the kind of operations side of it. The other thing that, so some of the things that that this group, just to give you some examples, some of the things that the group have decided, and we've only really been meeting here for a few months. We started out, the University of Arizona started out by, we're very decentralized, so I'm really talking primarily about the central IT unit. And we thought we would start out with three AWS accounts. We were going to have kind of a pilot or a sandbox. We were going to have an ERP, and we were going to have a DR. In the beginning, you saw we had, well over 75 even core enterprise services, but we were going to use those 3 accounts. As we got further along, and our technical staff is trying to maintain some kind of security, groups and management of these, it became clear that wasn't going to work. But who is going to make the decision of, are we going to leave that model? Are we going to abandon that model? We're going to do something else? How many accounts are we going to have? All of those types of things. So this cloud advisory team, a proposal was created. The advisory team met, discussed, kind of came back with a few iterations of, hey, we need to, we can't just create lots of accounts, even though it sounds good. We need these core things. What is the security model going to be? We're going to have a base security model across all accounts. So when an account gets provisioned, you're going to start out with these roles. Logging is going to go here. So we had kind of basic things that were going to be on each account. We're going to have account stewards, so somebody is going to be actually accountable for the security, for the spend, for the policies. On the policy side of it, this group came up with the tagging policy. If you haven't done much with tagging, I highly recommend you have a policy and you actually use it. So we started with a policy, but didn't really enforce it. And then as you start to try to make sense of bills, you can't. And so having a tagging policy and then actually using it, enforcing it is highly recommended. This group heard some technical pieces of, how are we going to connect our campus to the cloud? What type of connectivity are we going to use? There's many options out there. And there's a lot of things in the queue. So the big things are, now that we've decided on accounts, what's the decision tree to actually create another account? So big things are decision trees and decision logs. How are we making decisions, and then how are we logging what those decisions are so that we can maintain this going forward? So we can create those processes and procedures in the cloud just like we have on-prem. Results speak for themselves, but Derek's going to speak to them too.
I'm going to speak for them because they don't have a voice that projects. I want to point something out. This is kind of funny. This just struck me, right? If you follow this process, on the yes side of funding is required, over there to the right, the budget committee makes a decision and then they implement. Apparently the budget committee never says no. And frankly, the ideas are so good and generally so cheap and so much more compelling than on-prem deployment, the budget committee has yet to say no. So just to be clear, that is exactly their experience. There's not a no fork in that because we haven't taken that road yet. Ultimately we will, right? Because we're not flush with cash, back to the earlier thing, right? Budgets are shrinking. But again, these decisions so often make so much sense. By the time they get here, they're funded because they're the right thing to do. So, results that speak for themselves. The interesting thing I was thinking about a little bit ago is that, that this journey is something of an accumulation of momentum, right? And when we think about early on in our experience, we did things, we took an idea in from a customer that, prior to our ability to leverage Amazon, we would have kind of laughed off. We'd have said no. We'd have said, like, that's too hard or it's going to take too much time. one of our earliest AWS evangelists, who's in the audience at the moment, saw an opportunity to say, like, I'm going to leverage one of these cool tools to integrate this tool that our customer wanted. They wanted to do fancy, interesting things with mailing lists that we couldn't do with our on-prem listserv. And so he did it. And he was able to kind of go from idea or suggestion from our customer to fully implemented production product within, I'm going to say, a week and a half. He probably did it in about 35 minutes, but took 8 days for us to say, that's okay, put it into production, right? You take little experiences like that, and they build upon each other, and you build up momentum, and you build the use case. And eventually, it's this kind of this self-fulfilling prophecy, this thing that kind of rolls over itself. And you pretty quickly realize that you're going to need to get some of these governance things in place in order to really advance the PeopleSoft, the CCoE, the regulated research, the identity management systems. And so start small, grab some early wins, and recognize that this kind of governance, these cloud center of excellence, like, do that as early as possible, but don't do that before you have any experience in the cloud. That's just kind of, I think, unreasonable. Our results to date, again, I'm going to hit on the speed and agility, really time to market, or ability to go from request or idea, or our business, our customer, our institution needs a service, needs a thing from IT, to delivered thing. In order to be able to carve any time off of that at all, let alone experience exponential improvements in our ability to be responsive to the business, that's what we're after. Going from 6 weeks to 6 minutes. I would love next year to come back and say we went from 6 minutes to 6 seconds. I don't know that we can really provision RDS that quickly, but that's what we're after, right? Constant, continual improvement, but the exponential improvement that we've gotten out of things like CloudFormation and EC2 and ELB, just transformational in our journey, and they speak for themselves. They add to each other. Success here adds to the demand to leverage that success somewhere else. Auto scaling, can't say enough, particularly in higher ed, around things like our student information system at registration time, right? When we're building on-prem solutions in our campus admin or student administration system, we have to buy enough hardware to service the 4 weeks, the 8 weeks, it's 4 weeks kind of per big semester, but the 8 weeks of registration time. That's the heaviest time for those systems, and often we're buying many, many times more capacity than we need during the normal course of business. So you buy enough capacity to live through those 8 weeks, 44 weeks of the year. That capacity sits, mostly idle. You try to do good things with it. You do dev test or whatever with it, but for the most part, you've been forced to overbuy because of the demand spike. With auto scaling, with the ability to scale up and scale down rapidly as you need it, like, we can even do that inside of a day, ideally. So we scale up when the kids are registering, we scale down when they're not, and we only pay for the capacity that we're using. We only fundamentally have to manage the capacity that we're using when we're using it. That's transformational. And this one, the ability to go from no to yes, I've hit on it a couple of times, but that changes the game for IT. It gets us back to tables in the business or invited to tables in the business that maybe we weren't at before. When we were just, doing the plumbing, taking care of the servers, delivering the enterprise systems to the best of our ability, often we had to say no. We didn't have the time, we didn't have the physical capacity, we didn't have the storage or the servers to be responsive to some of those edge conditions that the business needs us to be responsive to. We can now say yes, and often we can say yes very, very quickly because of the power of the tools in the cloud, and because of the power associated with having good governance and good confidence in our ability not just to do a cool thing, but to do it predictably, scalably, securely, and into the future. So again, they speak for themselves, but often we have to stand up and say good things about them. And now for some lessons learned.
Lessons learned. Okay, we have lots of lessons learned. Kind of put them in our, traditional buckets: people, process, and product. People are really the most important thing. We have a staff of over 300 people, and they're experts in their field, and they know how to support campus, and they've been doing what they've learned, and now we throw in cloud, and they're completely uncomfortable and don't feel like they're able to support production in the way that they're comfortable to do it. So training is key. Career paths, we didn't do. I think it's still time. We have time to do that, but we're not doing this to eliminate positions. I don't think that we're ever going to eliminate positions. It's just different positions. So putting career paths in place so people know what their path is. Maybe it's something similar to what they do today. Maybe it's something completely different. But putting that together would make, I think, a lot of people more comfortable with the move, and then actually put a training plan together to get them there. And community. So there's lots, especially in higher ed, there's lots of ways to have community. I mean, there's big things like reInvent. We, like I said before, we are very decentralized, so we kind of put a campus community together where we have like open forum or open office hour type things where the IT community from campus and the central IT community can come together and trade, what they're learning and share, I tried this, or things like that. And so there's campus community, there's higher ed community, there's conferences like this, but I definitely, I would say that whatever you're going through, somebody out there is going through too, and to find those people and to try to collaborate as much as possible. We definitely are way further along by doing that. On the process side, really to combine those, the strategy, the concrete project, what are people actually going to do? If you just talk about it or just have the governance piece, there's nothing for people to do. That's you don't spend too much time in either case. The strategy and the governance, you have to tie in, otherwise you're going to have kind of those solutions all over the place. And then the biggest thing here is really to communicate and engage. The biggest thing is communicate what we're doing, why we're doing it, and make sure that people are engaged, because people have the best ideas, and if they have are empowered to try out those ideas, that's why we have those kind of sandboxes and things like that. That's where you're going to get those solutions that, at least for us, that campus really needs. And then the product itself, there are lots of, you can't keep up with the rate of change. I mean, AWS has, I'm sure tomorrow we're going to hear all kinds of new things that has happened. So you can't keep up necessarily with the technology, but to try to kind of see as much as possible down the road, as well as what's available now, because we were coming up with solutions that then, the next day there was a solution that delivered. So you can't get frustrated by it. You kind of have to embrace it. And then cost. So cost was not on the most important by any means of why we wanted to go to the cloud, but we also didn't want it to be our reason that prevented us from going. So cost overruns are really easy to do, because once someone has security and can do something in an account, they can do the something in an account and never shut, any of the resources down or create more and more. And so to get a handle on and have someone be accountable for the cost and someone watching that cost is important. We're kind of just tackling that now because we wanted to make sure that people had the ability to do what they needed in the cloud and didn't feel like that was the preventative thing. But then again, if no resources ever shut down and more keep popping up, then you're going to have cost overruns. Tagging, I talked about this before. Tagging is really helpful for billing, but it's also helpful for our tagging policy that we set up. We do have a service. What service is this resource for? But we have optional ones for time to shut down the resource. What environment is it for? Who created it? Who's the contact? Those types of things. So again, it's a very different model than an on-prem or a local implementation because you can just create and create and create, and so you have to have something available to let you know who created this and why. So tie back to a ticket, tie back to a person. What is this resource for and what's it doing for us? We definitely did not want to run into the situation where, it's a year later and nobody wants to shut it down because nobody knows what it does. And you don't want to be the one that flips the shut off switch and lo and behold, it was some major production thing that now you just took down. Some of the other lessons are more in the what we can do out there. So one of the things I didn't mention in the roadmap was our regulated research. Again, a research institution, and many of the grants require very strict security compliance areas. And so, Thank you. What we're able to do in GovCloud is really handle those grants in that dynamic fashion where, it can be one grant, it can be 10 grants, it can be high compute, low compute, and although we do want some, compliance on-prem, standing that up in GovCloud gives us the ability to handle and be able to apply for those types of grants. So on the technology side or the product side is understanding enough about AWS to be able to leverage it for those types of things. We talked about DR a couple of times. Well, our current DR, we're kind of in half and half mode where the on-prem, our users are still having to get out of the system and we're down for a day. And try to get a campus to all agree on a day to be down is impossible. It takes a year to get a day. So the workloads and the services that are in AWS now don't go down for DR testing. And that alone was a huge win. And so, as we move more of these enterprise services to the cloud, that's really a big win for our customers, is that they can work 24 hours a day if they so desire. So that's those are the major lessons learned, and we're still learning every day. Again, I mentioned before, but I would definitely say we really make use of the decision trees. We're not great at coming up with all of them yet, but to have something where you're making a decision based on something and you're not just winging it, and you can actually point to it and follow a tree to make a decision, and then the log to capture why that decision was made. Those two things are something that we're really trying to put in place, and that kind of came from that cloud advisory team. With that, I think we're supposed to growl that I'm not doing. And
bear down, right?